Learn English language with Manga Mmbagha. Part 1. Communication in English and Stylistics. This section of the course lays a foundation in understanding and appreciation of literary works. The works appreciated hereafter include 1. Poetry, The Wonderful Surgeon and Other Poems by Charles Mloka and Selected Poems by Tanzania Institute of Education. 2. Plays, An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen and Betrayal in the City by Francis Mbuga. 3. Novels, A Man of the People by Chinua Achebe and The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born by Ai Kwei Arma. Lesson 1. Communication. Human communication is also known as anthroposemiotics and is the field devoted to understanding in what way individuals communicate. Human communication is grounded in cooperative and shared intentions. Harnish, in 1979, on linguistic communication, argued that linguistic communication is successful when the hearer, immediately after hearing an utterance, recognizes the speaker's communicative intention. If you understand what one is saying or what you are reading, it is because you recognize the speaker or writer's intention in their discourse. It is because you and the speaker or writer share a system of inferential strategies that lead from the utterances of the expressions to your recognition of their communicative intent. Human communication entails verbal and non-verbal communication. Verbal communication is an agreed upon and rule-governed system consisting of symbols used to share meaning. This includes oral spoken language and non-oral communication such as laughing, crying, coughing, grunting, and so on. Verbal communication is the communication related to the use of words. Spoken language is oral and involves words just as written language does. Words represent ideas or feelings. However, the same ideas and feelings may be expressed in writing or by signs in signed language, where writing and signing are non-oral. Communication could also be non-verbal. Non-verbal communication includes oral communication such as a warning cough, a grunt of pain, a laugh of exhilaration, a calling cry, or a cry of pain and the like. But non-verbal communication may also be expressed through body language or gestures. Verbal communication is a system of symbols. Symbols are arbitrary representations of thoughts, ideas, emotions, objects, or actions used to encode and decode meaning. A system is a regularly interacting and interdependent group of items forming a unified whole. Every system is delineated or explained by its spatial and temporal boundaries, surrounded and influenced by its environment, in this case the speech community, also described by its structure and purpose and expressed in its functioning. The inputs of communication system are the word or sign pictures that may undergo internal transformations which yield the communicative sense or meaning of the communicative intent of the first interlocutor to the decoding second interlocutor, also called the converser. The words or signs are symbols that represent the intended encoded sense, which the second interlocutor labors to decode. Symbols and signs. Here it is important to distinguish symbols from signs. A symbol is a mark, sign, or word that indicates, signifies, or is understood as representing an idea, object, or a relationship. A symbol is realized in three levels. First, physical or corporeal level of working consciousness, which represents another corporeal. Second is the spiritual dream, which is the imagined picture of an idea, object or relationship, such as a zombie or any other apparition. And lastly, the ineffable, meaning the inexpressible of the absolutely unknowable that is only imagined. As I stated earlier here, verbal communication can be either oral or written language. However, these two differ in their nature of discourse called the medium. Differences between oral and written communication. Firstly, the two differ in their nature of discourse. That oral communication transmits information to the receiver through the verbal spoken message, while written communication is the communication mode which uses written or printed text in the exchange of information, and it belongs to the written communication discourse. Secondly, in the written discourse is a prerequisite that the participants have to be literate. In the oral discourse, on the other hand, the only condition is the ability to speak and to hear. Thirdly, the written discourse allows proper recording in the same original way, while in the oral communication, magneto-recording is possible but may be interfered or interpolated, which may alter the original message. Fourthly, oral communication is faster than the written discourse because in oral discourse, both participants are present at the time of locution, while in the written discourse, the participants may be separated in space and time. Fifthly, it is possible to easily correct or edit the message before delivery in the written discourse, whereas in the oral discourse, words once uttered cannot be easily reversed. Sixthly, there is a possibility of a misinterpretation of the message in the oral discourse than could be in the written medium. Seventhly, while feedback is delayed in the written communication, there is instant feedback in oral communication. Eighthly, oral communication is of the spur of the moment or spontaneous, unplanned and free-flowing. Written communication, on the other hand, is non-spontaneous or planned before delivery. Forms of communication. Communication is revealed in 5 different forms. First, intrapersonal communication, which is the communication with oneself involving a solitary speaker whose audience is oneself. It is also known as a soliloquy. It may also be the communication using internal vocalization or reflective thinking that may be triggered by internal or external stimuli. Such communication is perceived internally in one's own conscious and is unplanned, that is, spontaneous. Second, interpersonal communication, which is the communication between people who mutually influence each other and may function to establish, maintain, but also end or destroy relationship. It may as well be used for arbitration or reconciliation of damaged relationship. This is the communication that occurs in various contexts of social interaction. It is structured and influenced by social expectations. The focus of this form of communication is phatic communion, which means establishing contacts and relations to meet relational needs and communicating the uniqueness of specific relationships. This form of communication may require conflict management skills because it is prone to misconceptions and conflicts. Third, group communication is another form, which is the communication between 3 or more interlocutors, also known as discussants, who intend to achieve a shared goal. This communication may be frustrating because it may be conflicting personal interests, but is valuable for sharing ideas to a common goal. The communication in this form may be involuntary in that a position for discussion may be imposed from an outside stimuli. It is a task-focused communication where the interlocutors work together for an explicit purpose that affects each member. Challenges in this form of communication stem out of interpersonal conflict or misunderstanding among members. Fourth, public communication is another form of communication which is center-focused. One person is charged with conveying information to the public that may be present as in a religious sermon or a political rally, or to a distant audience as in educative meetings where the speaker addresses a large public, which could even be an academic lecture. In this communication, the sender should be cautious to ensure the integrity and the interests of their audience. Peter Jeff noted this in 2009. The speaker focuses on the topics he knows, loves, but also the topics the audience cares about. Fifth, mass communication is the last form of communication that is charged with the transmission of information to many people through some media that could be electronic, like the radio, television, the internet, print, like newspapers, magazines, books like prose narratives, plays, or poems. Consider Peter Jeff's illustration of 2009. The speaker chooses to speak on the meeting of the three circles which intersect. Essential characteristics of forms of communication. One is the source. The communication must have a source, which is the origin who is triggered by a certain stimuli, external or internal. The source encodes the message and loads it in a channel, which might be sounds and signs or body language in the oral communication, or in graphic terms in the case of written communication. Two is the message. In the communication process, the message is an important element which is the gist of the intent to communicate a certain information. It is this message that is embodied in the encoded form for the receiver to decode. Three is the receiver. The communication participation is complete if there is the recipient who receives the message and decodes it to meet the intention of the encoder. Where the source or sender is the first interlocutor, the receiver is the second interlocutor. This may be an individual or a number of persons. Four is the channel. The way through which the message travels between the source and the receiver is called the channel. Sometimes also it is termed the medium, as explained by Locke in 1691. This channel could be spoken or written language. Five is the feedback. The receiver of the message sends a response to the source. If the feedback is according to the intent of the source, then the communicative intention has been realized. But where the receiver sends an unexpected response, a communication breakdown has occurred. Six is the environment. The physical environment in which the communication occurs is an important characteristic because it may dictate the mode of the channel, the content of the message, but also the kind of language to be employed, the style, and the level of formality. Seven is the context. This is the milieu or the setting within which the psychological expectations of both the source and the receiver should be met. Where there is an emerging frustration or conflict, a remedy or some other kind of management should be instituted, that is, introduced. Eight is the interference. A characteristic of importance in the communication process is the presence or absence of any hindrance to the realization of the communicative intention. If such interference exists, the communication process is either distorted or blocked. Lesson 2: Communication and Stylistics. Stylistics is a field of social linguistics that studies linguistic style. Linguistic style is the variation of language. Language varies in different ways, spatially, chronologically, and also it may differ socially and according to the individual user. Spatially, the same language, say the English language, differs from one region to another. The different regional variations are called regiolects. We have British English in Britain or the UK, while a different variety is spoken in America, Australia, South Africa, and so on. These regiolects are also called regional dialects. Chronologically, the same language differs across time, for language is never static but dynamic. This boundary yields temporal or historical dialects. We had Old English, Middle English, and today there is Modern English. Socially, we have a different sociolective for every social grouping, a variety for a social class like the upper, middle, and the lower classes of people delineated socially, economically, or politically, which yield different sociolects. Either we have the ethnolects, also called vernaculars, separated by the ethnic origins. Sometimes they may be different languages altogether. Dialects. Dialects are varieties of language according to the user. This means, depending on who the user of the language is, where that user comes from, if American or British, South African or Malaysian, Australian or New Zealander, such is the variety called the regional dialect. Sometimes also a variety depends on the social class from which the speaker emerges, or the speaker's time in history, whether the user belongs to the times of Old English, Middle English, or modern times of English speech. Yet, each speaker has own way of speaking called idiolect. There are therefore four factors for dialect formation, which include the geographical factor, the social stratification factor, the historical factor, and individuality. Individually, each language user has a unique world view and chooses words from the large stock of a language's lexical items to suit the individual's vision, ideas, thoughts, and feelings. Even the grammar, lexis, phonology, and semantics of the individual user have a bearing to this user's worldview. Again, the individual user has a voice, tone, and rhythm that can only be identified with that individual. This is individuality and is a variation termed as idiolect. Further, stylistics aims at studying the behavioral aspects of language in its role to fulfill the task of communication and seek explanations as to why such features of language are employed, where and how they are employed. For example, there is journalist language which is characteristic of newspapers and magazines, legal language in the fields of law, or the religious language, and so on. Broadly, language variation may be categorized into dialects and registers. Regional dialects or regiolects. Regional dialect is formed due to the geographical extent of a language and interpolations incurred through cultural interaction. People from one geographical region will have linguistic features differing from those of another region. English regional dialects include the following: Welsh in Wales, Scottish in Scotland, Cockney in East London, Yiddish of American Jews, American English in America, Canadian English in Canada, Quebec English in Canada, British English in Britain, and so on. Temporal dialect. Looking back into history, languages have changed from one historic epoch to another. Germanic language changed to Gothic, then to Old Icelandic, to Old High German, to Old English, Middle English, and finally Modern English. The British people were conquered and ruled by the Celts who spoke Celtic for over 2 millennia. Some Celtic words survived in English to witness to this, mainly place names like Manchester, Leicester, and Lancaster. More Celtic words found their way into English through Irish, Cornish, Manx, and Scots Gaelic. The occupations continued with the Romans, Jutes, Saxons, and Angles, from which the words England and English originate. Also, the Danes of Denmark. See Nolan and Shale in 1999. Sociolects or social dialects. People of the same economic level develop their speech peculiar to their group. Others differ because of their education, cultural affiliation, or because of age, sex, and the like. Politically, the rulers and the ruled tend to speak differently. There are linguistic explanations for the variations, including vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and so on. These varieties of language are also known as social dialects or sociolects. The upper class. This is the class of the educated elite, the ruling elite, and the culturally and economically elevated. The class has members who are educated and their language is polished in the process of education. Their language follows filtered phonology, syntax, lexis, and semantic rules taught in schools. Their speech is dominant and is regarded as prestigious. It is well researched and forms the formal speech accepted in all forms of usage and is known as standard dialect. The middle class. The middle class has a language that leans towards the upper class, almost formal, but with interpolations from the lower class. They have a moderate education and their language is not very well polished. This language variety is marked with the use of euphemisms to avoid rudeness and the sharpness of certain vocabulary and phrases that would otherwise be considered by the upper class as uncultured or uncouth, which means not civilized. The lower class. This group of language users is normally poor, lack formal education, or have rudimentary or undeveloped education. Their language is non-standard, simple, and in most cases vulgar, that is, non-refined. Their pronunciation and syntax is generally poor compared to the standard dialect. Their choice of vocabulary is also poor in that the language is very much informal. The language is characterized by contractions such as I'll, am, and can't. Also, there is a lot of ellipsis, which is deletion or dropping of words or phrases, and much use of colloquial or profane language in whichever discourse of the lower class. Idiolect. Idiolect is the variation of language according to the individual user. Individual language users differ in their language use. In speech, their voice, rhythm, pronunciation, and word choice, which is diction, grammar, syntax, and semantics differ from one individual to another. In writing, each language user differ in their style in the same way as in speech, apart from their voice, rhythm, and pronunciation. A register is a variety of language according to use. This means that for every province or area of specialization, setting where the language is put into use, and the tenor, that is the relationship and purpose of participants in a discourse, which is the status of the participants, register may be categorized as follows. Discourse. Discourse is the medium of language employed in communication. The medium can either be spoken or written. The differences between written and spoken discourse have been analyzed earlier here in forms of communication. Province. Province is the area of specialization in which language is put into use. The language employed in the medical areas of communication is different from that used in the legal exercise, mechanical or electrical engineering, exposition, in geology, chemical engineering, religious language, and so on. Examples. Table salt is domestic and popular language, but sodium chloride or NaCl is chemical engineering. Water is popular language. H2O is chemical language. If one hears, friends, Romans, countrymen, give me your ears, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. It is popular language in the political rallies. But saying, ladies and gentlemen, the aim of this visit is to attend the burial of ceremony of Julius Caesar, who lies in state, is more refined, non-popular, and standard language. You must not steal or become unfaithful in marriage is popular language. Thou shalt not steal nor commit adultery is religious language. Or, this is a complex sentence is regarded as linguistic language. I find you culpable of first-grade murder and do hereby sentence you to be hanged by the neck until you die is legal language. The differences are marked by the specialized jargon or vocabulary appropriate to the particular area or specialty, the use of symbols such as those in scientific language. Setting. The setting is the place or area where communication is taking place. It could be in hospital, in a court of law, in a mosque, church, religious gathering, in a classroom, at a school assembly, in the sitting room, in the bedroom, and so on. Setting could also be the time of communication in the flow of history. There is a different choice of vocabulary, grammar, syntax, phonology, and semantics, which is meaning, at the different settings. In literature, setting involves the geographical environment, the socio-political, socio-economic, and cultural ideologies ruling at the time of communication. For example, during the reign of Mao Zedong in China, it was almost taboo to use capitalist terminologies except in derogation, and the language of the day depicted. Writing a narrative to show those times and places, an appropriate language for the setting is required. Another example could be that the language of a married couple in the bedroom is not appropriate for use in the sitting room, and so on. Tenor or status. Tenor is the relationship and purpose of participants in a discourse. This relationship determines the formality of the language, whether the language to be used by the participants should be formal, neutral, or informal. The levels of formality in a communication are categorized as follows. 1. Formal register. Formal language is less personal than informal language and is used in official communication. In written communication, it is used when writing professional or academic documents. This is the variety of language that is carefully refined in its grammar, syntax, phonology, and semantics because it is well researched. It is the variety used in educational instruction in schools, colleges, and universities. It is further the language used in diplomatic communication between nations. The formal level of language in communication is also applicable in business, politics, and administration. The use of any other level in the fields identified at this slide is regarded as lack of etiquette, which means the customary code of polite behavior in society or among members of a particular profession. 2. Neutral register. Neutral level of language formality is also referred to as the neutral register. The neutral language register is used with non-emotional topics and information. Neutral writing is not necessarily formal or informal. It is usually neither positive nor negative. A neutral register is used to deliver facts such as it would be in academic essays. Communication in writing in the neutral language register includes articles, reviews, some letters, some essays, and technical. Informal register. Informal language variety is the colloquial variety typical of spoken communication, which is spoken conversation. The variety at this level may include slang, figures of speech, broken syntax, or asides. That means spoken dialogue unheard by the second interlocutor but heard by the audience as in plays. This level of formality normally takes a personal tone that one would use when speaking directly to an audience. It is the level characterized by spontaneous, which is unplanned speech in places that may be described as real life or natural situations. Furthermore, it employs a low dialect rather than the high dialect in the society. 4. Modality. Modality is about a speaker's or a writer's attitude towards the world, their worldview. The attitude yields the method of their organization of their material when presenting them for their particular purpose. 5. Style. David Crystal sees style as referring to the distinctive characteristics of some single author's use of language, thus distinguishing, for example, the variations of language of Ngugi from those of Chinua Achebe. In other words, Ngugi can use different styles for different narratives. The language in A Grain of Wheat is not the same as that of Petals of Blood, both by Ngugi, but also the novels can be easily identified with Ngugi and differentiated from Chinua Achebe's An Arrow of God or Things Fall Apart. Reading Ike Arma's novels gives the reader a clue of Arma's language that is different from Danny Sappho's even where they are treating and discussing the same themes on the same historical background. This is a style in the eyes of the literary critique. Lesson 3. Style in Social Linguistics. In the eyes of the social linguist, whether in oral communication or written communication, language variation goes beyond the individual user and yields 6 levels. 1. Consultative style. This is the variety of language used for communication between interlocutors who are not familiar with each other, such as between a manager and the lower ranking servants, between a student and a teacher, headmaster, etc. This is the style that employs the standard dialect of a language. It is also used in serious communication such as educational instruction. The consultative style has the following characteristics. It uses polite language employing the modal verbs can, could, may, might, should, would. For example, can you please close that door behind you? Could you please open the windows? We need fresh air, don't we? They might join us, God willing. It is unmarked because it uses common core vocabulary. These are the words which are less familiar but very useful vocabulary used in written texts and in communicating academic facts, truths, and ideas. Sometimes these words are referred to as rich vocabulary. It inhibits or prevents revelation of the speaker's attitude and does not welcome showing the speaker's feelings. 2. Intimate style. The intimate style is the style of language used by interlocutors who are closely acquainted, familiar, or intimate friends, who use a very general language, who predict the other's feelings and reactions. The style has the following characteristics. Consists of casual and specific features of the participants and their purpose of communication, their choice of sound, tone, and vocabulary. The participants' vocabulary is limited and directed to specific meaning due to their shared knowledge and experience of each other. The language involves ellipting words and phrases deemed unnecessary, contractions and shortening of words. Where the participants are bilingual, they often code switch and code mix freely. Having informal features, dropping or ellipting redundant words and phrases, but also grammatical features of language deemed unnecessary for the understanding of each interlocutor's communication. The meaning or sense depends on mere assumptions due to the closeness of the participants and their shared experiences. Inclusion of disrespectful or profane vocabulary and expressions. Also, conversational or colloquial language, as well as at times the use of taboo language. Reading Aikwe Yarma's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, one sees his use of this casual style where he writes, "You bloody fucking son of a bitch," on page 6. "Women so horribly young fucked and changed like pants," on page 89. The participants address each other in their first names and they may shorten them. For example, "Look here, Rich. Mr. Gordon Maganga is not and can't be on our side. He's the boss." "That's true, Ben, and Salum won't succeed convince him. Time wasted, isn't it, Benjamin?" The use of slang is common in this style of language. 4. Frozen style. Frozen style may be defined as the most formal style and elegant variety that is reserved for communicating in the most static situations and provinces such as law, religion, poetry, literature, and literary criticism and the like. The style is static because it is used to preserve certain norms and aesthetics identifiable with certain areas of communication. The style is said to be frozen because it has remained unchanged since time immemorial. This style reveals the following characteristics. It contains jargon used in ceremonial communication. For example, during graduations, conferring degrees is accompanied by statements like, "In the power vested upon me, I, so and so, the Chancellor of the University of, decorate you, so and so, with the degree of Barrister at Laws, LLB, this 20th day of March." Or, in courts of law, it may be heard, "I, Judge so and so, having been satisfied with the evidence rendered beyond reasonable doubt, find you, John, son of Maimbo, culpable and guilty of the offense of violent robbery, and do hereby sentence you, John, son of Maimbo, to life imprisonment." The style uses unchanged phraseology in hymns, prayers, in churches, mosques, temples, or synagogues, such as, "In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." It is loaded with ceremonial statements as in oaths, religious vows, and the like, and is used in gospel songs, national anthems, or school and college songs. It contains well-known phrases or sentences that give advice or making statements of general truths, as in proverbial sayings, or contain idiomatic expressions. Formal style. This style is one-way participation and is used in serious communication and expert interaction. It is the style used in writing serious information, academic instruction, and symposium. The formal style uses very highly chosen and scrutinized vocabulary. Its grammar, syntax, phonology, and semantics are highly polished and refined. In writing, special formats are instructed and advised. In speech, special formats of presentation are also directed. The formal style reveals the following characteristics. It does not allow interruption. It uses technical vocabulary. It contains and emphasizes on exact definitions of terms. It includes presentations or introductions between strangers. It involves the use of common core vocabulary and grammatically well-formed sentences. It employs long, complex sentences, inviting the use of subordinate and coordinate clauses. It is likely to employ passive constructions. In spoken communication, it carefully employs intonation and proper pronunciation. Communicating participants tend to be impersonal and employ the neutral subjects, it or one, avoiding the use of personal pronouns I, we, or you, for example. It is said that democracy is key in development. One notes that the problem of delinquent children has taken root. It can be concluded that this style is very important in formal communication. One may conclude that this style is very important. It is used for restricted purposes in the legal, academic, official, and diplomatic communication. Informal style. Informal language style is the language use characterized by spontaneous or unplanned speech in natural communication and uses the low dialect in preference to the high standard dialect. Informal language is used in everyday conversation and personal letters. The style is just the opposite of the formal style and rhymes with the casual and intimate style. It is used in domains like instruction to subordinates and casual or intimate conversation communication with family and friends. It shares characteristics akin, that meaning similar, to those of casual and intimate style.